Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar, The Voices from Ukraine. Today, at this very crucial point in time for Ukraine. In mid-December, the Russian government published two draft treaties on European security, one between Russia and NATO and one between Russia and the United States. This move by the Russian government and President Vladimir Putin has the character of an ultimatum. And ultimatums are, as we know from history, often pretexts for annexation or war. At the same time, we have seen the deployment of 130,000 troops on the border with eastern Ukraine to the north in Belarus, and more than 30 ships carrying out live fire exercises in the Black Sea, causing concern among leaders in Washington, Brussels, and Kiev. In addition, the Biden administration announced that tomorrow the Russians plan to invade and called on all foreign nationals to leave Ukraine. The country and the people being threatened are Ukraine and the Ukrainians. And therefore, I'm today extremely pleased to have the opportunity to talk with people, important and people from Ukraine on what is actually taking place and some of the myths surrounding Ukraine to debunk these. So I'm very pleased to say welcome to Danila Lubkivsky, a Ukrainian diplomat and civil activist, director of the Kiev Security Forum, Ukraine's most public platform for high-level discussion on national and regional and global security. And in 2014, Danilo served as the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, as well as the diplomatic advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Then later, we'll hear Alim Aliyev, Deputy Director General of the Ukrainian Institute. Alim is a human rights defender, a curator of educational and cultural projects, researcher and media consultant, and co-founder of the Crimea SOS. And then Natalia Popovich, a civil activist and international communications expert, and co-founder of the Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and co-founder of One Philosopher Consulting Group. And last, we'll say hello to Adri Kuzman, head of the Association of Ukrainians in Denmark. So welcome to you all, and then I'd like to pass on the word to Danilo Lubkivsky. Welcome, Danilo.
Thank you very much. Dear Madam Director, dear Charlotte, thank you very much for this kind opportunity to address you and the Danish Foreign Policy Society. I'm also pleased to be here today with my distinguished Ukrainian colleagues and friends. And I thank Natalia Popovich, who has initiated this dialogue. I was delighted to learn a lot about the Danish Foreign Policy Society, and I'm frankly telling you that I'm impressed with how many good deeds you did and how many famous speakers addressed the topics that you raised throughout your impressive record. I'm representing the Kyiv Security Forum, the leading Ukraine's international platform on war and peace, on high-level discussion on national and global security and international affairs. And I would be happy to share with your audience, with everyone who listens today to what we discuss, my impressions of how Ukraine goes through these challenging times. First of all, let me start from this element of sharing my impressions from this private moment. I would say that recently answering to one of the questions about what people think about the war which is going to be waged or might be waged by Russia against Ukraine, I believe that the feelings of people are very difficult and confused. I think that Ukrainians find themselves like in the eye of the hurricane. You know, this is type of when, you know, it looks like everything is calm and somehow, you know, doesn't show any sign of an imminent threat, but nevertheless, the hurricane is all over around us. And this is, I believe, this is the illustration of what we feel here in Ukraine. Nevertheless, the war waged against Ukraine by Russia by Russia against Ukraine started in 2014, and we live with this burden, we live with this threat we have lived for almost 7-8 already years, with many victims, casualties, damages, and sufferings of our people. You've approached me with a number of questions that I wish to answer briefly, if I can, as brief as I can. Well, it's almost an impossible task for me, but nevertheless, I will try. When we speak about Ukraine, I wish you to feel that Ukraine is a democracy. And in my opinion, this is a vital democracy with very active citizenship. Ukraine is strong, and Ukraine, in my heart, I feel that Ukraine will overcome all the challenges we face today. Ukraine, a millennium history of Ukraine proves that there is very deep traditions of values in principles of self-esteem and natural rights in our country. And this is the signature feature of the Ukrainians. For ages, we wish to be free, and we fought for our independence and for our national identity and culture and for our autonomy, together with and actually for the perspective to live in freedom and dignity on these lands. This is contrary to what Russia tries to impose on Ukraine. While talking about democracy in Ukraine, I will say that I would quote famous two scholars, Alexander Motel and Dennis Soltis, who wrote an interesting piece. I advise your experts to read it in the Foreign Policy magazine, published in 2019, about the origins and how Ukraine's democracy looks like and how it develops. And I will quote a few elements from that famous piece. First of all, Ukraine is a centrist democracy. Ukraine is doing well, despite the fact that we are at war, and despite the fact that we have to imagine 1.6 million displaced persons in our country. It's a huge amount. It's a huge figure. We can compare this with, for instance, the wider urban area of the Copenhagen, which is around 1.3 million people. It's even bigger than this. And imagine that, for instance, all the inhabitants of Copenhagen are forced by the aggressor to leave the land, to leave the capital, and to move away. Imagine how damaging is this type of suffering and challenge. Ukraine has an essentially market-based economy. The oligarchs, the big capitalists, still have an excessive role in the country. Hopefully, the market economy will shape the relationship between big capital and Ukraine's civil society and Ukrainian people. I believe that this is part of that revolution of dignity that we have to complete and accomplish in the future if we are going according to the principles of rule of law, competition, and equal rights for all. But the overall system of our economy is moving in the right directions with a number of certain points of growth and dynamism. Ukraine has a rapidly and politically moderate civil society. Usually people, when address Ukraine, say that Ukraine has a problem of weak public institutions. But nevertheless, the fact that we survived and we succeeded in the war which was waged against Ukraine by Russia proves that Ukraine is on stable footing, and Ukraine has strong institutions that have to be improved and developed. So as Alexander Motel and Dennis Soltis put it, democracy in Ukraine is working. But there is another part of the story that I want to briefly say. As it was put in the questions that you enlisted, if we look at our relationship with Russia, we will definitely see some important elements that I believe is worth mentioning today. First of all, if we speak about the Putin's tactics and strategy against Ukraine, I have no doubts that Putin has already lost in Ukraine and to today's Ukraine. He failed. A new wave of threats, what we experienced in 2021, a new wave of threats and an escalation of Russia's military presence around Ukraine's borders have united Ukrainians and strengthened what is most important for us, a feeling of national solidarity. So Putin has done much to strengthen Ukrainians' national identity and distance them from the colonial past. Another, in my opinion, reason for Putin's fiasco lies in the absolute lack of appeal of the so-called Russian idea, the revisionist concept of Russia, the historical, national, and cultural paradigm of Russia's superiority over its neighbors that Putin tries to impose in the regions around Russia. The mere fact that Putin cannot find a way how to deal with Ukraine, how to build up the relationship with Ukraine, proves and shows, other than by threatening it by force, proves the complete failure of the Russian idea. There is another thing that should be mentioned, and this is the final, nail into the coffin of the myth of the so-called one people, as recently Putin wrote in his article about Ukrainians and Russian, claiming that this is one people. Historian Professor Timothy Snyder called these arguments laughable, ridiculous article that maybe you are aware of. So, and the last coffin into that nail is the complete silence on behalf of the Russian political, cultural, economic elite, and only a few from the 140 million nation were outraged by Putin's rhetoric against Ukraine and his plans to invade our country. I mean, for Ukraine, it sounds like the greatest failure of Russia. The crisis Putin has initiated, in my opinion, had multiple goals. First of all, to establish a new power balance with the West. Secondly, to find a solution to the Ukrainian issue. Thirdly, to accomplish de facto annexation of Belarus, and some other elements that we can elaborate on later. But everything he did worked against him. Never before in Ukrainian history has the West fought so unanimously for our state. And this is the fact. The West's timely and large-scale reaction has made Putin lose the courage to use military force against Ukraine again. Still, no scenarios, however, can be excluded, while messianism and rationality still remain in a fight in the Kremlin. But main conclusions are becoming very clear, and I will finish by outlining them. First of all, Putin and the Russian idea have lost to today's Ukraine. However, Putin will have no intention to step back. On the contrary, in my opinion, he will seek revenge. Putin understands that the strategic military maneuvering and potential threats to use armed forces are his most powerful weapon. Not even war, but this instrument, this leverage to have this potential threat and impact upon Ukraine and the Western politics. This is his strategic weapon. And this is why we should expect multiple responses from Russia's president. First of all, in my opinion, the Kremlin will look for ways to gain the maximum possible dividends from its dialogue with the West concerning the strategic stability and arms control. Annexing Belarus completely, even in an undeclared fashion, is yet another dramatic consequence of the present crisis. We should certainly expect ongoing Russian hybrid war against Ukraine and the West, with the goal of anchoring Ukraine in a gray zone without any chance to join NATO and European Union, and without any good prospects of the economic development. Under these circumstances, Russian propaganda, and we already see it, will gladly stir up anti-Western hysteria in Ukraine, claiming that the conflict is America's work and that Ukraine's betrayal is the result of it. So we need today think what to do next. And in my opinion, I will mention three elements. It is necessary to unfold and keep a wide-scale European, Euro-Atlantic dialogue on emphasizing common values and security, with the goal of mobilizing the Western public opinion and building immunity to the Kremlin's new ideological attacks. Point number two, under no circumstances should we deviate from the idea of Ukraine's membership in NATO and the European Union. Here we have to choose in the same way as the Adenauer's West Germany once went on. We can't accept Russian ultimatums toward the peace settlement in the East and definitely the illegal annexation of Crimea. If we accept this, it will lead Ukraine and Europe to a dramatic collapse and further challenges. Neither can we forget about Moldova, Georgia, and the independent people of Belarus who fought for their freedom in the dramatic fight, an unfortunate dramatic fight with the dictator Lukashenko. So this is the picture, and this is the introduction that I wish to start with. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Danilo. I just start my video. Thank you, Danilo. I just have one follow-up question to you, because it's you painted the picture of sort of also the Moldova, Belarus, the independent people of Belarus, and you. But how do you see that there's any way also of influencing the population in Russia to include them, because there's some way also hostages to what's going on? And I saw a recent poll by Levada Institute, and they are actually very much supporting, or not supporting, but they are fond of Ukrainians, as well as Ukrainians are fond of Russians in this poll. So you could say that there is some kind of common understanding to be built on, but there is no voice for the Russian people at the moment.
Thank you for this question. And I believe that the reason for this question is absolutely natural and civilized. Definitely for Ukraine, for Ukrainians, it's a very natural feeling to see Russians as their friends, since, I mean, for many reasons. And basically for the reason that we have more than 2,000 kilometers of a common border with Russia. So definitely from every point of view, it is important, you know, to see, to figure out, to set up a civilized dialogue with Russia. The role of Russia's civil society is extremely important, but unfortunately, I have no illusions about that. Definitely, we see a lot of decent people in Russia who cannot accept the political regime of President Putin, the kleptocratic culture of its economy and politics, who feel themselves as the slaves of that regime. An unfortunate result, a consequential result of this type of things is a complete silence. This is the silence which is dead. And unfortunately, this is the fact that I have to recognize. We closely follow the developments in Russia, trying to see the light in the tunnel. And I hope that one day that light will come on before us, and we will establish, elaborate the dialect which may bring good benefits to both our nations. So far, it doesn't seem to be like that. Contrary to that, what we see in the Levada's polls, that around 40 million people in Russia not only support the politics of President Putin, but actually are those who order that music, who inspire President Putin to continue with his imperialistic, let it put it bluntly. I mean, if we speak frankly about the situation, this is a revisionist politics in some elements with the very clear fascist elements of conducting things and exercises to undermine the European security and security of the neighbors. So, and there is a strong hold within Russia which orders this type of political attitude. So this is a problem, and this is a problem which should be, because we cannot say that this is an eternal problem. We definitely believe, I hope so, that it could be treated in the way how to bring Russia back to the civilized international dialogue. From Kyiv's perspective, from the Ukrainian perspective, the question what to do with Russia is the key question of the international politics in the 21st century. So I believe that all efforts aimed at enforcing the civil society in Russia are extremely needed and should be continued. Point number two, we need to have no illusions that this process can bring rapidly or quickly for some immediate results. But nevertheless, this investment of light and dignity should be sent into Russia, since we all want to have Europe united and at peace.
Thank you, Daniel. I just wanted to also recognize, the Russian opposition politician who was killed nearly 8 years ago because he was actually exposing the Russian, the Russian interference in the Donbass region.
You mean
Nemtsov, yeah. So it is also dangerous, apparently, to be exposing what is actually going on as a Russian in these areas.
Madam Director, let me say that especially because of this danger and threats that exist today in Belarus because of Lukashenko, in Russia because of Putin's regime, it is so important to ensure that Ukraine is protected. Since this wave of violence and pressure against the opponents, against humans' dignity and national rights is focused today on Ukraine. And for that, I would like, summing up, I would like to thank your Foreign Policy Society and Denmark, your government, for such strong and clear and unambiguous support of Ukraine, Ukrainian rights, and what is even more important, our common values and principles that we have to fight for.
Thank you. So with these words, I'll pass on the microphone or the screen to Alim Aliyev, co-founder, human rights defender, and co-founder of Crimea SOS. So welcome, Alim.
Thank you, dear colleagues, for this opportunity to share my perspective of the situation in Ukraine, and especially in occupied territories of Ukraine. Danila gave an extensive view of today's situation, and I want to stress about Ukraine identity and special identity of Crimean Tatars, why it's important today. Ukraine society is on a dialectical path. Part of the country is struggling to get out of the colonial past in Ukraine, the fever of decommunization process in Ukraine, of course. But we are increasingly returning Ukraine origin to names, to phenomena, to events of international significance, from the, for example, artist Kazimir Malevich to Shedrick's song. And we'll achieve this with the help of cultural diplomacy. But the other part of our country occupied by Russia, and I say it about Crimea, I say about occupied territories of Lugansk and Donetsk regions, is forced to plunge into the abyss of neocolonialist politics, with the glorification of our executioners, both historical and modern. Colonialism is about appropriation or destruction. I think there is no third. And now I want to focus about memories, symbols, names, and peoples, and explain it on the example of the Crimea. I am originally from Crimea. I am Crimean Tatar, and during last 8 years, more than 2,000 cases of the human rights violations were documented on the peninsula, and among them, 130 cases of people placed under detention, 15 cases of forcible abduction. Today, almost 200 children have been left without further care. And most of these people are Crimean Tatars. And it's just a top of iceberg. And the bottom of this iceberg, we have the system of colonization. For example, Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians with very clear national identities have been viewed as a threat to Russia's security in Crimea by the peninsula's occupying authorities since 2014. Therefore, Russian authorities destroyed tangible and intangible cultural heritage that does not fit into the Kremlin's modern ideology. One good example is the fate of the Khan's Palace in Bakhchisarai. It's a crucial object of the tangible heritage of the Crimean Tatar culture. It's being distorted under the guise of restoration. Next example, the National Preserve of Tarik Chersonesos, located in Sevastopol, is awaiting a similar fate. Moreover, Russia is manipulating by historical narratives, appropriating this Chersonesos, which is has dubbed the cradle of Russian Orthodoxy, because Kievan Prince Volodymyr was baptized there. Moscow did not even exist when Prince Volodymyr was baptized. At the same time, the premises of the Ukraine Orthodox Church are being raided. These days, the church is one of the pillars of Ukraine identity on the peninsula. One more, it's about Crimean Tatar national identity. And today, Russian authorities are also using Crimean Tatar religious identity, something that has always played an important role for us, against us, by fabricating the image of Muslim terrorists and extremists. Russia uses two articles of terrorism and extremism when it persecutes many Crimean Tatars in political reasons. Crimean Tatars are Sunni Muslims, but in our religion and in our nonviolent resistance in Soviet times and now, it's a fundamental element of the struggle for our land. The change of identity on the peninsula population also carried out through the militarization school children consciousness. From, for example, trying to make such young army. It's a paramilitary formation in school. But also we have a new collective simulacrum in Crimea that named Crimean people. It's created by analogy with the Soviet one, which is inscribed into the Russian paradigm, and then is any national characteristics. The Crimean Tatar language is listed as one of the disappearing languages by UNESCO list. That's why Crimean Tatars see its preservation is one of the key tasks these days. Only 3% of pupils in Crimea are studying in Crimean Tatar language. To stop the language from disappearing, parents create private initiatives for learning the language, as well as speak in the home with their children. But if we say about Ukrainian language, we haven't any Ukrainian teaching schools in Crimea. But we have one more problem. It's the population replacement. Since the beginning of occupation, near 50,000 of the inhabitants left Crimea. It was a brain drain because these were social active persons disloyal to Russian authorities, Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians, young professionals, students, business persons, public leaders, journalists, artists, etc., etc. But we have the reserve trend. The peninsula is colonized from mainland of Russia. State officials, security officers, pensioners and business moved from Russia to Crimea. According to the Ukrainian think tanks and Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, the number of people who arrived in Crimea reached 500,000 of people. Our time, there were several attempts of changing the ethnic comparison in Crimea by squeezing the indigenous Crimean Tatar people. These policies date back to the first annexation of Crimea by Catherine II in 18th century. Also, it's peaked in Stalin's deportation of 1944. And last, today, of course, I said about a lot about identity, about colonization. Ukraine established a Crimea platform initiative. It's designed to be an international coordination mechanism of the occupation of Crimea. But also we, with our teams, with our partners, we, through the mechanism of cultural diplomacy, we trying to send the messages about Crimea, about people who live in Crimea now, and about political prisoners. And also for us, it's crucial today, it's first, it's support independent initiatives existing in Crimea. It support initiatives aimed at preserving and strengthening of Crimean Tatar and Ukraine identities through the culture, through the educational program, language program, research program. And also it's important to take an active part in Crimean platform and develop Crimean initiatives in European countries, in countries where we have strong support of Ukraine and Ukrainian freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Alim. I think it's very important because actually in the whole crisis that we've had in the past 2 months since the Russian ultimatum, very little has actually been spoken about Crimea. It's as if we sort of forgot about Crimea in this whole. It's all been about the East and I don't think there is a very strong understanding of actually what the people who are left in Crimea are suffering, and also whether all those who have left Crimea. So how many people did actually leave Crimea after the occupation?
Today in Crimea live more 2 million people, and 50,000 people left Crimea during the occupation.
Okay, thank you so much. But we'll return to you at the Q&A session, and then I'm pleased to pass on the word to Natalia Popovich, please.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much for initiating, allowing us to introduce what we have to say about the current war and the current crisis, and for your support and for the Danish government understanding what is really at stake. But it's really, we are grateful for the ability to speak to the audience of the Danish Foreign Policy Society and for putting these our perspectives forward. I have to tell you that probably just like Danilo and Alim, I think we all kind of find ourselves in Ukraine in this very strange position, because we are yet another generation of Ukrainians who all of a sudden again need to defend Ukrainian independence against Russia. We find ourselves kind of in the shoes of our parents or grandparents, like mine, who have been sent to the Russian and Soviet gulags for wanting Ukraine to be free and independent, and for the Ukrainian people to live in dignity. And really, it breaks my heart to have to send, already it's been my 4th letter to my team about checking out bomb shelters and being ready with their escape suitcases in case the full-scale invasion starts, and for the people to reconsider their life plans, for our lives to be even put under such an unimaginable and unnecessary, from our perspective, stress that that unfortunately Putin's regime and the Russian current leadership have created, I think, for all of us. So you've asked me to address maybe some of the points of these myths and that Russia has exploited over the years in regards to Ukraine and in regards to the West, and also to talk a little bit about the real and imaginary threats of NATO towards Russia, as well as what is the price that Ukrainians are prepared to pay. So in terms of the myths, I think, over the years, Ukraine has been sort of the battleground for exploitation of various myths by the Kremlin and its agents as information weapon against Ukraine. And it's really time, I think, for all of us to finally disarm them. All of these myths are, as we say, kind of rice paper thin, but nevertheless, they've been pumped out very effectively by the Russian state TV for their domestic audience. And I've studied that in the course of my research, as well as promoted by Kremlin's apologists globally. As one of the Russian intellectuals, I think, said some years ago, that if you were to watch Russian TV, it would feel like Russia is this tiny country, maybe the size of Switzerland, on all sides surrounded by Ukraine. This is the extent to which Ukraine has been put at the heart of the Russian government propaganda. And unfortunately, the truth is that Russia now has surrounded Ukraine from the north through the annexation of, basically annexation of Belarus, east and south. And it's a non-imaginary threat that we all need to address. I think the primary and this very important myth that Russia, really thinks that Ukraine is not a nation, or that Ukraine and Russia are deeply fraternal nations, or that Russia is this big brother to Ukraine. And Putin and his establishment, just even recently, Surkov, today or yesterday, they do not want us to believe that independent Ukraine exists. Well, it's almost as if Germany were to deny Denmark your right to exist, or any other country. And we all know that this is not how modern nations work, that this is called imperialism, and that it goes against any legal principles of state sovereignty and basic moral principles of democracy. very often we say that people who speak of other nations as little brothers actually do want to be big brothers. And we have dark periods of our history, joint history with Russia, unfortunately, and we view it more as a history of domination and an abuse as any brotherhood. And in reality, also, even though the Russian president has been saying that how much we share, but indeed, ever since the Muscovite state in 17th century decided to put the name of Kiev into the name of its state, Russia basically put Ukraine at the heart of its strategic narrative, and most of Russian history has been falsified. And in reality, Ukrainian and Russian nations have spent considerably more time apart than together. We've been together with Poland and Lithuania, and as part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And Ukrainians' experience of Russian rule has been the darkest of all, even though Russia is trying to sanitize its imperial past. And we are scared, and we are, disheartened by the fact that even today, according to, again, Levada, which you have been citing, there's a huge popularity of Stalin among the Russian population. His popularity has grown to up to 40% between 2011 and right now, while, for example, the popularity of human rights activists such as Andrei Sakharov have fallen disproportionately. So we're looking at it from this sort of perspective where Russia has always wanted to have greater control over Ukraine and suppressed any Ukrainian nation building efforts. And not just Ukrainian, we need to understand that really, unlike the rest of the world, Russia tries to limit the sovereignty of all former Soviet republics. And the beginning of the aggression against Ukraine was in fact in Georgia in 2008. And somehow instead of Kremlin being concerned about, the development of Russia and the Far East and the empty Siberia and its own internal problems, it's being much more focused on Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine or limiting our sovereignty. There's been these myths about the language issue in Ukraine. The purpose of this strain of disinformation for years was to present Ukraine as somehow divided on the issue of language. But the reality is that, up until a few years ago, I had a problem of finding a Ukrainian language kindergarten and school for my kids in Kiev. And the reality is that Ukraine's language has been limited in its application in the state during the Soviet time and even during the Ukraine's independence for many years. And only recently, according to Ukrainian legislation, we begin to see more books published in Ukrainian and more radio and music being spoken in Ukrainian. And actually now, because of this aggression from Russia, even more of the Russian speakers in Ukraine who are Ukrainian patriots, they are intentionally and consciously switching to Ukrainian language in many of the instances. Language is not an issue. The divide of the mentality is the issue at heart of what's at stake. There's been this also, myth, I think, of Ukraine being populated by anti-Semitists or being influenced by extreme right. And I think this is an especially interesting one, given that in the last 8 years, ever since, according to the Russian propaganda, Ukraine has been more under this influence. Never Ukrainian extreme right have been part of Ukrainian parliament. Never have they had more than marginal or zero to marginal popularity, far lower than in any of the Western European nations or in Russia. And also the fact that our prime ministers and presidents have been of Jewish origin, and I think it's not a common case for many of the other European states, but Russia nevertheless seems not to ever cease to promote this myth, but it applies not only to Ukraine. Again, in my studies of the Russian TV propaganda against the European values and kind of European way of thinking, it's just easier to have an aggression against somebody if you kind of dehumanize them and you call European values more decadent or behaviors. And I think, unfortunately, that has been the case, and not just against Europe as a whole, but in particularly against Nordic nations as well, because wars require soldiers, to address the enemy, and that act is made much easier. The enemy is someone who you have who you don't have any affinity for. And I think also one of the final myths is this notion that Russia is constantly under threat from Ukraine and from the West. I think President Putin somehow manages to portray himself as this strong man on one hand and a victim at the same time. But the only threat that points in Russia's direction is really the threat of a free and successful and just and prosperous Ukraine. Because if Ukraine were to have a chance to continue with our reforms, bringing our legislation even more in line with the European, bringing up the quality of life of people, I think we would set very dangerous precedent for the Russian people, for them to want to follow and oppose to this kleptocratic Putin's regime. They just simply cannot allow that. I think one of the questions that you wanted me to address was the role that information plays in the ongoing conflict. And of course, again, we've seen so many of these different provocations and different misinformations and Russian propaganda. But I think Ukraine is a little bit more immune maybe than other European states, because we have the historical memory of what it was really like to live under the times of the Soviet Union, what repressive and filled with cultural fear this monstrous state was, and that adds to us. And I would say that to an extent, I feel like information plays even more important role for the Western democracies, which do not have that level of immunity, who have been, living on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And I mean, to me, the fact that for the sake of profits of cable companies, outlets like Russia Today continue to broadcast freely in some of the Western countries, makes no sense. It's kind of like if allies were allowing, I don't know, Radio Berlin to be broadcast to their troops during the World War II. I mean, there are numerous studies that show how Russia is weaponizing information to influence the Western issues such as energy dependence, labeling democratic and liberal values as decadent, historical justice issues, and these broadcasts are still somehow, allowed. And I think, again, that, even on the issue, very important one of energy dependence, it's not even about information, it's about the real facts. Ukrainians are very much aware of the Russia's true sort of intentions and immune to the workings of Russian chauvinistic propaganda. Today, pro-Russian propaganda in Ukraine has become much more cunning than it was 7 years ago. Its goal is no longer to prove that Russia is good, because the war kind of disproved that already. But now they kind of seek to deprive Ukraine of its independence as an agency, and trying to convince some of Ukrainians that the threat to this agency does not come from Russia, but from the West. But at the same time, if we think of kind of European immunity to this disinformation, and if you think about the fact that in 2013, 2014, when Europe was sort of punished, so to say, by Russia for supporting Ukraine in our expressed European course, and Russia was creating shortages of gas for the European countries. It's interesting to think that in 2013, Europe was less dependent on Russian gas than it is now. I mean, things like building of Nord Stream 2 kind of go against any common logic, because it is, of course, against the interest of anyone to be dependent on the imports of somebody who is so unreliable and so antagonistic. And in that regard, we think that there has to be still reshaping of thinking and better awareness kind of all of the threats. And in terms of this narrative of NATO and Russia and Ukrainian wish to join NATO somehow being a threat, well, I think this is one myth that Russia has been continuously exploiting. And we, of course, understand that NATO is a defensive alliance which was created to defend free and democratic nations against the influence of the Soviet rule. And I just wish we could all stop kind of playing to this Kremlin playbook, basically, because it's not that NATO wants to expand. We know it maybe doesn't much, but it is responding to the nations who feel threatened by authoritarian regimes, like Russia. And it's not that it's eastwardly expanding, it's just that the countries in the east, like ourselves and previously the Baltic states and previously Poland, were so threatened by by Russia that we now do very much want to join NATO, and I think it's a natural wish. And in December 2021, 67% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO, and 60% supported, Ukraine's NATO membership as a deterrent to further Russian aggression. And these figures again are all the more striking because until recently we regarded Russia as a political and cultural friend, which has become impossible ever since their recent behavior. And it's of course being fueled, by messages like ones from Vladislav Surkov, who I think just today or yesterday said that now Russia wants to expand to its imperial borders of 1918. So according to him, Ukraine and the Baltic states should be part of Russia now. So it doesn't seem like these imperial ambitions really want to go away anytime soon. So we all need to think hard what is the best way to democratize Russia, and also how to help it behave according to the international law, which we all find has been the most important outcome of all of the suffering of the 20th century. And then finally, sort of what is the price that Ukrainians are prepared to pay, I think was one of the questions. And I want to say that, we feel like we have already paid a high price enough. We've already paid the price for democracy in numbers that make us, I think, more than trustworthy, in case anyone doubted our commitment to freedom or democracy. Just to reiterate that, in our history, between 4 and 10 million Ukrainians died as a result of Stalin's man-induced Holodomor in 1920s and 1930s. Those were free-thinking farmers that opposed the Bolshevik rule and represented a growing Ukrainian national identity in opposition to the Soviet Union. According to Tim Snyder, Ukraine sacrificed 6 million soldiers and civilians in the World War II, 6 million. And this was to defend our freedom in the world and our freedom against fascism. And Putin lies when he tells the Russian audience and the world audience that World War II could have been won without Ukrainians. Unfortunately for us, it's not true. And moreover, when the World War II ended, it did not end with Yalta Agreement for Ukrainians. Our insurgent army fought until 1954 because we thought that we were worthy of a Ukrainian independent state. And Ukrainian elites, like my family, has been sent to Soviet gulags for striving for independent Ukrainian state. And, we've paid the price of Chernobyl and hundreds of thousands of people who died as a result of Soviet party's careless policies and disinformation during this tragedy. And this was kind of the last straw that killed the Soviet Union, and no one could have trusted anyone after that. And Ukrainians have proved, I think, in the course of the 3 revolutions that we've had in the last 31 years, that we always stand up for democracy. We always ensure that we have elections happening, that we switch, the power is switched in Ukraine, that we have a pluralistic society, that we don't have any one single ideology that controls, our consciousness. And we are always standing up for that. And 100 people, now known as Heavenly 100, have died in 2014 in the streets of Kyiv, defending under European flag, European values. And since then, our soldiers had to defend our borders against Russia, who decided to annex Crimea and create chaos in the east of Ukraine. So losing already 15,000 people and having displaced 2.5 million people who lost their homes in Crimea and east of Ukraine, we feel like this should be enough. But, moving forward, Ukrainian army is prepared to defend us today. Unlike in 2014, fortunately, we do have 250,000 strong army with a high number of people who already have had very recent combat experience against the Russian army. And we also have some of the best Ukrainian officers who are now in charge of our territorial defense. And, again, my heart breaks when my colleagues and employees and many friends are enlisting to join the territorial defense units. But if this is what we have to do, we have to do it. And the proportion of Ukrainians who are ready to defend the country, as you know, or if you don't know, it's very high. It's one of the highest in Europe. I think it's going to share the top place with Finland, probably also because they understand who the enemy is. And 60% of Ukrainians answered yes to the question of putting up armed resistance. And again, in 2011, it was just an abstract enemy, so it was much less. So it grows because we feel we need to defend ourselves against this threat. So we don't lack the motivation to defend our country and will resist anyone to decrease. But my question is kind of, what collectively the Western countries can do more, what Denmark's role can be, because I think Denmark is a great example of a country who's extremely ethical, and we count on the European countries now to kind of take the high road in helping us to defend the freedom and democracy, because in order to defend that against Putin's dictatorship and authoritarianism, we will need to make sure that both Ukraine and European states become much more immune to Russian energy ultimatums and become independent of its energy. We need to understand that we all need to have to be more honest, because Ukraine has its own share of oligarchs to deal with, but it is European banks and European financial systems and consultants that they use. And without your help upholding higher ethical principles, we won't be able to stand up to the kleptocrats, neither in Russia nor anywhere else. And we just all need to collectively increase the cost for Russia of such behavior and of really ruining the very principles of international law that have been governing the world, ever since the horrors of the Second World War. So we sincerely hope that Ukraine is not going to be alone, and we count on more of that support and help. And you can count that Ukrainians will play their part, but definitely only in solidarity and on putting personal cost for Putin and for his closest circle, for people who should carry the responsibility for their actions and know that there are consequences. Only in that regard we can build a more secure Europe, and I would say more secure world for our children. That's what's at stake right now. Thank you so much for having us a chance to speak with your audience today.
Thank you, Natalia. I'm afraid we won't have very much time for questions now. So because there's just 5 minutes, and I think I would also like to give the words and concluding remarks to Adri Kuzman. So Adri, will you take the floor, and thank you to Natalia.
Good evening to everyone, and I want to thank you everyone who joined us today and spend this 1 hour to listen more about Ukraine. I really, as Ukrainian, think it's very important for the whole Danish society and Danish people to understand more what's going on in Ukraine, because it's we also have an informational lab what's going on there and what people think about it, right? And thanks to Danilo, Alim, and Natalia, and through your guests, 70 people, we can share this knowledge, and then it can be shared to your colleagues. I am a chairman of Association of Ukrainians in Denmark. We represent like 16,000 of Ukrainians who both live and work in Denmark. And of course, we are small ambassadors of Ukraine over here, and we're trying to share the word, like as much as we can, because the price is very high. The price is a war. And as we can hear by statistics, it could be like 10,000 people be killed in the war within 1 day, every day. So it's really high price which could be paid. And that's why we are Ukrainians here, like addressing the issues of Russian aggression against Ukraine to Danish society, asking for support to Danish politicians, and of course to you. And thanks for Foreign Policy Society to be together with us today. I think it's very important. The last thing I want to say is that we conduct surveys through Ukrainians, what do they think? Because it's, since December, I started getting calls, like on a daily base, on a weekly base, where people calling to me as a chairman of organization, both Danish people who are married to Ukrainian and also who has a business in Ukraine and employees in Ukraine, and also Ukrainians asking what's going on, like what we can do, how we shall prepare, and then we as Ukrainians here say like, okay, we shall do something before it starts, we need to be ready if the war will start tomorrow. So we made survey asking the people, Ukrainians mainly, do they really think that the war will be in Ukraine? And they think, unfortunately, 40% of them say yes, it can happen, and more than and around another 32% say the chance is more than 50-50. And of course, it makes us even more worried about it. Of course, I heard Danilo, who said, like, Ukraine are in the middle of hurricane. That's why they feel quite calm over there. But Ukrainians in Denmark, we are out of this. We can hear only information, which is coming. So I think we are here even more worried, hearing a lot of, we are on Danish radio, Danish television, giving interview to Danish journalists. But that's our weapon, like right now, our words is our weapon. And that's how we can help our nation, our society in Ukraine. And that's why we also addressing to you, support us to spread the word, just to have this small talks about Ukraine on the pause, because that's how people, getting aware of what's going on, and if they get aware, then they are not indifferent anymore. They can feel us, they can feel what is the truth, why Ukraine in this situation and why they should support Ukraine. And I think with this big support, of course, Ukraine, thanks to European Union, thanks to Denmark and to all other countries, will win in this informational for now war. Thank you.
Thank you, Danilo and Lim and Natalia, for contributing to this. And hopefully we will have a quiet tomorrow and nothing will happen. I really cross my fingers. Hopefully, in that way, that the diplomacy will win, and that nothing will happen. But I'm so happy that you could come and provide your thoughts on what is going on and bring Ukraine a bit closer to us, so we can not be indifferent, as you said, Adri. And thanks to those who watched today, and be peace with you all.
We hope for that. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.